Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Randy. It's been a long time since I filmed a video, but I've been wanting to do it, so I figured might as well just come back. It is a new year. I have new goals, new thoughts, and I want to share them. So I haven't made a video in like 2 months or so because I just completed my first semester of grad school, thankfully. And while the beginning of the semester wasn't like too bad because of course like the essays and work hadn't piled up too high, once I got deeper in it kind of piled up, so I took a break from making videos to make sure that I was focusing on that. But now it's break and I have a little bit of time off, so here I am. I'm very late doing the end of the year book tag. This is kind of like my 2023 reading wrap up. I got these questions from Destiny Sidwell's channel, so I kind of like took all the questions that I had an answer to, I had thoughts about, and I'm gonna answer those. And I left some of them out just because like I don't have thoughts on them, or they just aren't really in tune with the way that I read and look at my read books. So we'll just jump right in. The first question is most disappointing read of the year. I have 2 answers for this. The first one is Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. So this one was disappointing because I really loved it for the first like maybe 75% of the book, and then it has the classic like third act issue between the couple, and it was just a trope that I just simply can't get behind. I'm not gonna tell you what it is. If you're curious, don't know what it is, you can look it up, but it's been quite talked about heavily that Carly Fortune has a tendency to use this trope in both of the books that she's had that have been popular. Those might be her only 2 books, but it just had so much promise. I just hated that plot twist and I hate that trope, and I can't do it. And the second one is very sadly Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. So I really enjoyed Fourth Wing. It made it in like, if you go to my mid-year book tag or whatever, I loved Fourth Wing and I talk about it in that quite a bit. And then I was so excited for Iron Flame to come out. I had pre-ordered it before I moved to a new house, and my pre-order went to my old house because I forgot to change the address before it was shipped. That book is gone forever. So I went to Barnes like the morning this came out. I woke up, I went straight to Barnes like as soon as it opened. My Barnes isn't that popular of a Barnes, so there was plenty of books there. I met some girls, it was really cute, and I read this book immediately. It took me maybe a week and a half to get through. It's kind of a hefty book, so I wasn't worried about like how long it was taking me, but it was just the pacing was such a problem. And there were so many character developments that I just did not like, or maybe just the lack thereof of character development for some people, or like the direction that some of the characters went in. I'm not gonna say too much because this is a second book and I don't want to spoil anything from the first book, but I had some pacing issues and some character issues that definitely could have been, it didn't have to be a problem. I think the length of this book didn't have to be quite as long, or there were some scenes even that like something would be happening and then like the chapter would end and then it would like pick back up after the event had happened, and kind of just like quick recap of what happened, and I'm like, we're skipping something that could potentially be a really great scene. So I just had some issues with like all like that kind of stuff. I did really like the ending though. Definitely will be continuing the series because like occasionally you have that in a series, especially like a 5-book series, that like the second book has like kind of flops a little bit and then it picks back up in the third, and I'm really hoping that's what happens here. The Iron Flame just wasn't as good as Fourth Wing, and honestly the more that I sit on Iron Flame, the less I like it. Like at first I gave it a 4.5 and now I'm honestly more like a 3.75 stars for this book. So again, like I enjoyed it, just really disappointed me in certain aspects. But yeah, so Iron Flame and Every Summer After, the most disappointing books of the year for me. 2, I have a book that was overhyped. This one might be questionable. This is very much a literary fiction, like mom type of book in my opinion, and that is Remarkably Bright Creatures by Shelby Van Pelt. So I read this book for my fiance picks my TBR video, and you know, I tabbed it. It definitely wasn't a bad book. It was just like I was expecting it to be so good because I'd heard so many good things about this book, and it just was like fine. Like I didn't hate the book, I didn't love the book. It's like a 3-star read. The characters, they were sweet. The octopus, Marcellus, he was sweet. The plot, it was sweet. It was fine. I just never felt super deeply connected to what was happening in the characters, and I also knew what was going to happen the entire time. Like, this book doesn't kind of build up to like a reveal or anything. It kind of reveals things along the way, which isn't necessarily a problem, but it didn't work for me in this book. So I didn't think it was as good as everyone was saying it was, but it's not like a bad book by any means. But Remarkably Bright Creatures. Then I have 3 fave book couple of the year. So for me, I read Beach Read by Emily Henry this year, and I really, really liked it. It's my favorite Emily Henry. So January and Gus are my favorite book couple, I would say. They are just so sweet. Oh my, I love that. There's like that quote from Gus. It's like, oh my god, I don't know the quote exactly, but basically he's like your existence is like overwhelming to me, or something like that, something along those lines. And that is just, I just love Gus. If you haven't read Beach Read, it's my favorite Emily Henry. I think it's the most rewarding of the Emily Henry books, followed by Happy Place. But really, really liked it and loved these 2 in it. And then there is fave main characters of the year. So I have 2 main characters that I really loved. Let me grab the book. We have In Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I loved Sam. He is the main male character in this book. There's Sam and Sadie. I did also really like Sadie, but I just loved Sam. I read this book last February, I think, so like the details of this book are kind of iffy for me since I did read it quite a bit ago. I loved this book. I loved the friendships in this book, but Sam as a character is just really well done, and I think that he is often misunderstood, and I just have such a soft spot for him. I just love him. Then I have Tyrion from Game of Thrones. I've read the first 4 books of the Game of Thrones Song of Ice and Fire series. Oh, I thought I had the next one on this cart. I don't. So here's just 2 of them. I love Tyrion. He's my favorite out of all the Game of Thrones characters. I think by far, truthfully. I like quite a few of the characters and I hate quite a few of the characters, but Tyrion is like a consistent, realistic character to me. He is very morally gray. However, he has, I think, a good heart inside, and like he doesn't just go by like house loyalty. He goes by what he thinks is right. I mean, overall, he is the most important person to him, and you know, makes sense. But I don't know, he's just a great character. He's very funny, he's very witty, he's so intelligent, and I just love the way that he maneuvers around these warring houses in the Game of Thrones series. So I love Tyrion. Then we have a book that surprised you. I don't have the physical book with me. It is The Smell of Other People's Houses by Bonnie Sue Hitchcock. This book, I have heard nobody talk about this book except for Reagan from Per Use Project. I've never heard anyone talk about this book. It was so beautiful, and it's very short. So basically, The Smell of Other People's Houses takes place in like rural Alaska, and follows just like a smattering of characters from this one small town. And it's kind of like a no plot, just vibes book. I mean, there's a small plot and like you are following something that's happening, but it's more just like a character study of all these characters. It's like a town study almost of like this rural town in Alaska. And I don't want to say too much more about it because it's more just like the feeling I got when I read the book. It was like the atmosphere was so well done by Bonnie Sue Hitchcock, and I really think that it's a really great historical fiction book. I think it takes place in the 70s, so it's like historical fiction now, but it was just absolutely fantastic, and I wish other people would read it because I think that it's one of those historical fictions that like it deserves so much more hype. Like I would even place it like up to like Kristen Hanna, even though Kristen Hanna is much more emotional than Bonnie Sue Hitchcock. The way that it made me feel was kind of similar to like Kristen Hanna's books, so it really surprised me. I really, really loved it. New fave author that I discovered in 2023. So there's quite a few authors that I discovered in 2023. I would say, oh, this is kind of cheating. I'm gonna say anyways. I would say Gabrielle Zevin, who wrote Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. However, I did discover her unknowingly in 2022 when I read This Storied Life of AJ Fikry. which is also a phenomenal book, super, super well done. But I didn't really connect the dots that she had wrote both of those books until later on, which is kind of silly. It literally says her name on the front of those books, but I didn't think about it, I guess. But when I realized that she had wrote both of those books, I was like, I will read anything that Gabrielle Zevin writes at this point, because she has such a way of crafting characters and making you care for them that is just so special. And I think about them all the time. I think back to both of those stories and these characters all the time. So Gabrielle Zevin, I think, is the author that I'm like, is like an auto-buy author now, you know? The happiest book that I read this year. So I have 2 answers for this. Heartstopper Volume 5. I lent Heartstopper Volume 5 to my twin brother, so he has my copy, so I'll just hold up Heartstopper Volume 2. That one just came out December 19th. I read it in like an hour and a half, smiling ear to ear. I love Heartstopper so much. I love Nick and Charlie. They are just the cutest. Of course, that one's like a given though. Then I also have, I've talked about this quite a bit, Fruits Baskets, the entire series. I read volumes 1 through 12 this year. And this gives me very similar vibes to Heartstopper, except there's a little bit of like a magical realism fantasy element in this, but it is young adult. It does follow like a little love story. It follows like these young characters, and you love them and their friendships and their family, and it is just so feel good. And I've discovered that I really love like manga and graphic novels like a ton. They add so much to it, and like seeing like their expressions and like the creativity that it plays into it. I don't know. It's just adds another element of being happy when I read them. So yeah, Heartstopper and Fruits Basket are the happiest books that I read this year. Most frustrating book that I read this year was Lizzie and Dante by Mary Bly. I talked quite a bit about this book in my April wrap up and in my mid-year book tag, I believe. So I won't say too much, but all I know that I still feel when I think about this book is that this book was just so disappointing and so frustrating because it fell into so many tropes and cliches that it did not need to have. It takes place in Italy, and like I love books that take place in Italy. I just think that they're really atmospheric. I love that vibe. And like when you pick up a book that takes place in Italy, that's what you're looking for. I don't know. And it just didn't have any atmosphere to it, and the characters were just a bunch of Americans like in their little pocket of being American, and it was just felt so unnecessary that it was in Italy, truthfully. It just frustrated me. It just didn't need to be like that, and it was. Best adaptation of the year. I don't really watch a lot of adaptations, especially newer ones, because I like to make sure that I read things before that I watch them, except for The Summer I Turned Pretty. I did watch that, but I haven't read it, so I can't say how good the adaptation is. I'm gonna go back to Heartstopper, because the season 2 came out, so Heartstopper volume 2 to season 2. Absolutely amazing, feel good, love it. Not gonna say too much more about that, just because like I just did. The longest book that I read this year is A Storm of Swords, A Song of Ice and Fire, book 3. So this one, I read it on Kindle. So on Kindle, it's like 1,200 pages. I think this physical, like mass market paperback is like 1,100, almost 1,200. So it's super, super long. And this is my favorite book of the series. It was absolutely phenomenal. But yeah, pretty long. And then the shortest book that I read this year, I read quite a bit of short books actually this year, which I normally almost never do. I'm kind of a long book person, but I think it is Things I Have Withheld by Kai Miller. This is like creative nonfiction. It's a collection of essays, and it was really, really phenomenal. I really loved it. It was so well done and so emotionally provocative, and it made me think about a lot of things that I don't think about. I don't want to say too much more about it just because I feel like I won't do it justice, but it's a collection of essays, and a lot of them take place in or about like Jamaica and Jamaican culture, and a lot about race and gender is like a part of this as well. But there's a lot more to it than that, but that's like a kind of general gist. There is of course a weaving thread throughout all of these essays that connect them all, but super, super phenomenal. This is probably like 200 pages, and I listened to this on Audible, which I super recommend. If you're gonna read this, or like a collection of essays, I recommend Audible just because the author usually will read them and it adds a lot to it. So I loved that. I also read 2 collections of poetry, which were super, super short, but because they're poetry, I don't really want to include them just because poetry is typically always very short. I did read 2 collections of poetry though. Books I haven't stopped thinking about: The Smell of Other People's Houses, and then Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. Again, I kind of already explained that, but I think about those books all the time. I loved them. Cringiest book I read this year. I'm gonna say Brutal Prince by Sophie Lark. I read it in like a day. It was very quick. It's like a mafia romance. Sophie Lark has been very, very popular this year. I read it because my bestie, Rissa, loves Sophie Lark, and I totally get, like, it was a fun book, but it was like, I don't know. I think it was too much for me. Like, I did find myself cringing, and there's like illustrations in it, which typically I love. I love illustrations in books typically, but I think it just didn't work for me. I don't know. It was just too much for me. I don't know. Didn't really love it. Unpopular book that I loved. So I don't think that I really loved any unpopular books. However, I disliked a very, very popular book. Where is it? This one might hurt some people. I did not like Binding 13 by Chloe Walsh. It took me probably a month to read this book during the semester, which broke my heart because I was really excited to read it. Like, I was like itching to read this book for so long because I heard so many good things and everyone loved it despite some of the issues that are pretty apparent with it. But I just couldn't, the writing, I just couldn't do it. Like, I just don't think the writing is good. And this book desperately needs an editor. That's all I really want to say. I just didn't like it. That's not the question, but I decided to flip it because I didn't have an answer. And then we have, what was the highest and lowest rated books I read this year on Goodreads, and do I agree or not? So the highest rated book I have on my Goodreads that I read is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. This has a rating of 4.62, and I would agree. I loved this book. I gave it 5 stars, so definitely agree with that. Fourth Wing is very differently than Iron Flame, very fast-paced, very consistently paced, and had some really solid character development and character growth throughout it, and it kept me gripped the entire time. Absolutely loved it, so I definitely agree with the high rating. And the lowest book on my Goodreads that I read this year is Immortal Longings by Chloe Gong. This one had a rating of 3.55. Again, I would say I mostly agree with that. I think I gave this book a 3 stars, maybe a 3.5. I don't remember. I read this also for my fiance picks my TBR video, and it has a lot of potential, so I'm debating if I want to continue with the series or not. It's like a steampunk fantasy Antony and Cleopatra retelling. So there's a lot of really cool elements in it. It's just the characters, I wasn't super attached to them. And just some of the plot points, it just wasn't really gripping my attention that much, but there's definitely potential there for it to get better. I just don't know how I feel. So it's kind of like a mid book to me, which 3.55 kind of agrees with that. Book with the most unique concept. So this is a book I read twice this year. This is the first book I read in 2023, Nightcrawling by Layla Motley. So I don't think I've talked about this book at all. The first time I read this book, I liked it and I thought it was really important of a book to read, but I also couldn't say that I enjoyed it, and that's probably still true. I reread this very recently because I wrote a huge paper on it for a class of mine it's all about sex work, and I wrote about sex work and decriminalization and that kind of thing. So I think this book is unique because it talks about sex work from a young woman's perspective as well as police sexual violence, and I feel like this topic isn't really talked about in depth the way that it does in this novel. Like, this novel is all about that, right? And about, like, along with other topics, but that's like the main center conflict in this book is like sex work and police sexual violence and like stereotyping sex workers, right? And I just don't see a lot of fight back against like stereotyping sex workers and like that, like the stigma around sex work. I don't see a lot of pushback against that, except for like in dark romance, which can be taken by some people in like one way or another. This doesn't romanticize any elements of it, right? It shows you some reality. I don't know if I'm explaining that very well. It was a really well done book. I really, really liked it. Also very shocking because Layla Motley wrote this when she was 17. Very good book and a very important topic that I don't see very frequently. So, and then we have, oh, also I wrote down things I have withheld by Kai Miller again for this, just because like it's creative nonfiction and I have not really read a lot of that. So for me, this was really interesting and really unique, the way that these essays were done, because I don't know about you, but I was under the impression that like collections of essays just weren't appealing, but this is one of the best books I read all year because it was done so creatively. So I just thought it was really cool. I don't know. I recommend giving it a try, especially if you're looking for like to try a new genre of books. Book that you read that you would reread, of course, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, The Smell of Other People's Houses, and books that I did reread this year that I think are worth talking about. The Hunger Games trilogy. I read these the past like week or two, just because right now I'm reading The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Anyways, so I reread these. They held up really well. I loved them. The last time I read them I was 14, so it's been almost 10 years. But yeah, they held up really well. I would reread them again probably in the future. Reading goal, reflection plus 2024 goal. So my goal for 2023 was 50 books. I read 58 or 59 books. My Goodreads is a little messed up, so one of those. So I beat my goal. I did really well. Next year my goal is still 50. I don't really care that much about a goal, but I feel like 50 books is like a solid number of books. I just keep it that way because I usually hit it with no problem. But yeah, and what am I prioritizing in 2024 reading wise? I want to read more literary fiction, and I want to complete some series. So I want to complete Game of Thrones and the Raven Rings trilogy, which I can't really, this is the last book here, The Might. So nothing crazy. I don't really have any crazy goals. I'm trying to stay away from making like unrealistic goals for myself. And really it's just like continue reading off my physical TBR and finish some series and maybe a little bit more literary fiction. But yeah, so that's kind of like my 2023 reading wrap up, my 2023 end of the year book tag. Hopefully I'll keep making videos this month and like moving forward. I'm gonna do my best, but thanks for watching. See you guys another time. Bye.